2-year was in January. You know?
2 years.
So, being that you like the brown,
Is a brown coin?
I got you a brown.
A brown.
Excellent.
You're welcome, buddy. And Eric Sims celebrated his 9-year yesterday.
Wow.
And I knew that he wasn't going to go to a meeting to get coin. So I'm going to make sure that we did that for him. So here you go. Congratulations, man. I figured I'd put less on Facebook and do more in person.
I appreciate it. That's cool. Thank you, man. That really means a lot.
Thank you.
Speech. I know there's some other things that are coming up and whatever, but I'm a big fan of year multiples, but other stuff is good. 90 days, 6 months.
All good.
But I'll come out for the brass ones.
Yeah.
Brass one.
That brings you out. Well, how many years brings Joe W out?
For a while, honestly, he would, when he would get to his place, he would make a tour.
No.
And go pick up his coin and celebrate Recovery South Tampa. And then go to 301 House and get his coin for AA. And he'd go over here for NA. I mean, I'm just like, because I haven't got coins outside of what was given to me probably after 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, whenever we left Sally, and I don't even know what I did back then, but so when I left South Fellowship, I started going to get my coin. I think there's a good purpose to it, you know, so you experience something both, and people can know that you can do it in different environments, but he came out for my 10-year, so maybe that's what it was.
Yeah. Remember the decade he came out.
Yeah, I even got his decade coin, which was pretty special.
Yeah. When he comes out, you better listen.
I'm telling you, you better. He might be listening right now, you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He might be getting ready to come out.
Remember I said the other night, you don't know, he could be in the bushes. You'll only know after you wake back up. I think you got laid in the grease. All right, so we were talking a little bit about how everybody's doing. Was that kind of waiting on you guys to get here? So he had an event. Thank God, everything went good. You had an event, or having an event still, I guess you call it, but it's you know where it's going now. So that's good. Young man with the chicken down there had an event last Friday with his testimony, right? I know everybody had fun at the river. Had a good time down there. Anything else before you get going? Awesome. I had an event yesterday, as you well know. I'm not a. I've never tried to make a big deal out of my anniversaries. You know, when I've done it. I did put a post up yesterday because I was just feeling really grateful and wanted to thank some people, and it was the best way to do it. You know. But it was a really neat morning for me. I was going to stop and share this with you guys for a second before you're going. So I woke up, went to the gym. It was early before everybody else was up, and I just was thinking about where I was 9 years ago, and how much has changed, and how 9 years might seem like a long time in some senses, in some ways, but in other ways it's not. It's not that long. In some other ways, and in a lot of ways it doesn't seem like it's been 9 years. In some ways it does. I started really paying attention, like kids and where I was and things that have changed. But I just was really grateful. I stopped and prayed for a while in the gym, cried a little bit, and just kind of. And I always take those moments and feel like this. One of my big fears, I guess, is that one day I'm always worried, like, well, one day will I wake up and this won't mean anything to me anymore. You know, like I'll get so far down the line that, you know, I'm just kind of like, yeah, cool, you know, or that's great, you know, or whatever. And so I'm always, I don't know what the word is. It makes me feel good, I guess, is the best way I can describe it, that on days like yesterday and on times when I like give my story and talk about being here, or when, you know, I had that moment 9 years ago, that I still get really emotional about it. It still has a major attachment to my spirit. That no matter how far I've traveled down the line and how many different people I've come in contact with and how many times I've screwed up, you know, because my 9 years has not been perfect by any means, you know, that I can still go back to that point and have that attachment, you know, to that point in that way, you know, that it hasn't gotten, because if I think about other stuff that 9 years ago, I don't have an emotional attachment to it, you know. I mean, there's people that I was really close with that after 9 years, I don't have that type of emotional attachment to, you know. So, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, I'm grateful that I'm still grateful that you know, that about that, because the day that I'm not, if I were to wake up and not be, I think that would scare me a lot, you know, to think about what God did for me at that point in time in my life and have no emotional feelings about it, you know. So anyway, it was a good day of that. I had a lot of nice things on top of this today, just a lot of nice comments and prayers and thoughts, and I normally spend that day just kind of reflecting on like all the different people who have contributed to my recovery, you know, my life in general. But, you know, just people that have prayed for me for years, people that have built into me, people that have coached me, people who have tolerated me, you know, people who haven't killed me or whatever it may be. So it's just a cool time to stop. So I want to encourage you guys, you know, when you come on those milestones, you know, whether it's 60 days, 90 days, a year, 2 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, you know, try to make that part of your routine. You know, stop and take a few minutes and just think about all the good things that have happened because of that one decision, you know, that you made, and the relationship that we've all started to build since that decision, you know, and the walk we get to experience because we continue making that decision. So anyway, I was excited. I was like, you know, I'm not gonna say I never thought I'd get to 9 years, because when I got clean, I really wanted to stay clean. I didn't look that far ahead. You know, I didn't start putting timelines down. I just knew I did never want to use again, and I still don't. You know, I still have people that will say, you know, you think you could drink and you know, be okay. You know, I'm at a point now where I say, I don't know and I don't care. You know, I mean, it's like it's not worth the risk to me. It's not worth it. I don't know how else to say it. You know, I was like, I got responsibilities, I got other stuff that I enjoy, and I think about it, I'm like, I don't even know if I'd enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I play the card deals, like, I don't even think I could enjoy it anyway, even if I were to make that decision, because it's just not the agreement that I made. You know, I made an agreement, and the agreement was I wasn't going to do that anymore. So there's plenty of other things in my life that I get to enjoy, and you know, I've made a decision that I'm not going to do those. I'm only going to put things in my life that contribute to my growth and contribute to more importantly, the growth of others. And that's not one of them. It just doesn't. I haven't been able to look at that and go, how can this benefit other people and me, right? And I haven't been able to come to that answer, so there's no point, right? I mean, I always go back to it. It's not going to help my family. It's not going to improve my marriage. It's not going to do this. It's not going to improve my job. It's not going to improve my mental status. It's not going to, you know, and so it's nice to be in a place where I don't have any emotional attachment to that stuff, you know, other than it's just not me. You know, I don't have to shy away from it. I just don't do it. It's not me. It's not who I am, you know. And I know more of, kind of like Alex's point on Friday night, like he said, I know who I am now, you know. I know who I am, and I'm okay saying that's just not me. Nothing wrong with it. Other people can go do it. You know, if you can do it and do it like it's intended, which none of us can, nothing wrong with it, right? But when it causes the problems we've all experienced, ain't for us. So, you were sharing your story, and Jason was talking to you about, how you handled that, which was admirable. And I think back to early recovery when things would come up, like things that would normally, like when they'd come up, I would either lie, hide, manipulate, or get angry and respond poorly, right? And that used to be just about anything I would say to me, right? It was, if you challenged me in any way, or I thought you were challenging me in any way, or anything was going on that made me uncomfortable, I immediately lied, hid, got angry, got defensive, whatever it may be, right? It was, and if anything that was potentially negative that I could see coming my way, then I definitely went in defense mode. Like, I get in a wreck, somebody starts accusing me of something. Well, I would, in my earlier years, I would have been defensive. I would have been like either gone after that person, yelling, screaming, mad, or if I had done something wrong, I would have probably been like on the other side of it, saying, well, that was, his fault, that was her fault, that was those fault, blaming everybody else. The car's fault, the tire's fault, the street's fault, the light's fault, the sun's fault for being out, the wind's fault for blowing me too fast. And so I remember, and I think I shared this in my testimony, some certain things, but I remember like the first couple of times I fessed up, in situations that you normally would, in your mind, would never fess up. I walked in when I was in court, when I was still in jail, and said, I did this. And in all reality, I was leaving a lot on the table, of judge could have said a couple, there's a limit, but the judge could have done a number of different things, right? And I had options. I could have, not said anything. I could have had my lawyer position things a little bit different. We could have drugged things out further. There's all these different options we had. But I wanted, at that point in time, because I'd started to understand that I'm supposed to be responsible and be responsible, tell the truth. I wanted to stand up there and just do it, And I did it, and it was one of the most freeing moments I remember in my life. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what just happened? And it really wasn't about how everybody responded. It was just about the fact that I told the truth, and stood in that, and that in telling the truth and exposing truth, I was more secure than I had ever been in all the lies I had ever told. And it was weird because it was so counterintuitive to what I'd always told myself. I'd always told myself, you have to protect yourself. And the way you protect yourself is you put up all these defense mechanisms and hide behind all those things. And then all of a sudden this comes crashing in where the way I protect myself is to be transparent and, and put things out there. And when I do that, I'm exercising something that's beyond my understanding because, culture and everything else has told me that's not what you do, right? Don't tell people who you really are, because then you could really get hurt. If you just pretend to be somebody else, then they can only hurt the pretend person you're pretending to be. And so, anyway, it ties into, I didn't know we were going to talk about tonight because I had time to do a whole lot. But it ties into where we are in the process with the Ten Commandments and stuff. So I'm probably going to go a little bit off track tonight on some stuff because there's a lot going on right now. But I think we can try to find a way to tie it all in and yank out some, hopefully, what is good principles and things to impart on our lives tonight. So we've done 1, 2, and 3, right? Which was, I'm the Lord your God, have no other gods before me, and don't take my name in vain, right? Remember those? And those were about getting humble, getting thankful, getting centered, and starting to make good decisions, right? And that, we're getting that decision-making mode. And so the fourth one is what? What's the fourth? The utterance, commandment, instruction.
Remember the
Bueller.
Sabbath day.
And keep it holy.
Okay. Remember the Sabbath day.
And then you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Would be the corresponding run-on.
Correct. So he's already ahead of me. Good job. So you're starting to learn. Boom, boom, boom. You're already going there. So remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, right? And what's the corresponding one on the other 5? Remember we did the 5 and 5?
Thou shalt not bear false witness
Shall
against your
not
neighbor.
bear false witness. Amen, counselor. Okay, so let's look at that for a minute. How do we start going about this? How do we start figuring the underlying meanings and stuff out with this? What's our process?
Start by breaking them down, right? I mean, in the aspect of like, what does the fourth mean in generality, and what is the...
Yep, start breaking down. What does it mean? And how do we go about doing that? What have we been doing normally to figure it out? To give us some insight and some keys on how to start figuring out what it really means. Because we can take it at face value. It says honor the Sabbath. All right, we can sit and debate all night what that means, right? But how do we start figuring out, based on the line of thought we've kind of been going down this process, how do we figure out what that goes to? He brought up the fact that we have the corresponding one that's on the other side, which is don't bear false witness, right? So how do we start identifying what this undercurrent of principle or overarching principle it would be is?
To break down, I mean, both of them really at the same time, I would say. So what is the Sabbath? You know, it's God's day. It's a day of rest. And then you can look over. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So it has to do with something with truth.
Okay.
So be truthful. Be true to your relationship with God.
Okay.
You know, for the Sabbath day. And your neighbor. So the people that are surrounding you. Don't be dishonest. Don't lie. That kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. It's a great way to start down the path, right? So we look at the horizontal one first to kind of identify better what the vertical one means, right? Because it's easier for us to see this one at times. So it says, "Don't bear false witness against your neighbor," right? And so what does that mean? You said some of it. Don't lie about them, right?
Don't
So look at the
speak
words.
against them. Don't say something untruthful or speak negatively, I guess.
Okay, so you got to speak negatively, speak untruthfully. Look at the. Let's kind of slow down and look at the words. What are some of the words in that instruction for? Let's see, it'd be 6, 8, right? Is that 8? No, that's 9.
Yeah.
9. And for 9, what are some of the words that jump off the page there to you that are probably very meaningful?
Witness. Witness.
Okay, good. So witness, right? So, like that's the first thing that would jump off to me is like, what's a witness? Right? What is a witness?
An observer or a viewer.
Okay, so a witness does observe.
Confirms.
Confirms. Could. Somebody look up the definition of witness real quick. We're fortunate enough to have someone who might have some insight into that.
Well, there's someone who can testify as to the veracity of something.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Look at that. All right.
Say it again.
Testify as to the truth of a fact.
Okay. So witness is someone that can testify to the truth of, we'll call it an event, or to a fact, right? It really is to a fact. It could be a fact, event, a person, a place, or something like that. But they're testifying to the truth of something, or the validity of something, right? So taking that understanding, again, kind of reread that, right? You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What's another word that jumps off that page out of that sentence?
I think like bear. In my mind, I think bear is like both it's like commission and omission.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can bear some, like you can be the one doing it, or you can allow it to happen, or you can be a part of it. You know, there's passive and active ways to bear something.
Awesome. Now we're getting somewhere, right? So there's a passive and active part of this, right? So there's a passive and active part of that word bear. So what else jumps off the page? Or is there anything else? Again, there's not a wrong answer here. It's just what's God saying to you when you're looking at this. Ask yourself questions. What does this mean? What does that word mean? What does that word? How does that word describe something?
Neighbor.
Okay, so what's a neighbor?
Like, I guess, I mean,
Howdy, neighbor.
I don't know, just trying to bounce the ball a little bit.
What would be a neighbor? Is that any human being you go into, or what classifies a person as a neighbor?
Good question. So that's a great question. Does that mean, when we say neighbor, are we talking about the guy that lives next door? Are we talking about anybody that has to be next to me, to my left? Maybe is it somebody that has to be to my right? Is it somebody that has to be beside me or in front of me or within a certain vicinity of me? Does a neighbor mean that it has to be somebody of the same faith as me, same race as me, same sex as me, same age as me? What is a neighbor?
I think a neighbor could be anybody.
Could it be anybody, or is it someone
Could
specific?
be anybody. I don't know.
I
How would you figure that out?
Shares the same planet you dwell on, the Earth.
Could be. That's good. We're getting somewhere. Ask lots of questions. So, think about it. Could be a coworker. Is a coworker allowed to be a neighbor?
Yeah.
Okay. Could be a girlfriend, boyfriend, wife. What's the verse we're looking at there? Is it Exodus? Exodus 20.
I don't have it.
Excuse me.
written
Must
down.
not
16?
testify falsely against your neighbor.
Okay. Testify falsely.
I have it right here if you want.
I'm looking this up real quick. Anybody else got anything?
Can I go say brother?
Your brother?
Does neighbor mean brother?
Could mean brother. So I'll look at the word that's here, ra'ah, in the Bible, which is friend, companion, fellow, another person, friend, intimate, fellow citizen, another person, to a weaker sense, other, another, reciprocal phrase, right? So it can be used a number of different ways. So that's always just go back to language and look at it and see what does it mean, right? And then I've got to start visualizing who is that in my world, right? And that's the thing. It's like okay? So I got neighbor. Who are the neighbors? Like, because I have to put a face with something. I'm not just, I can't think of like generic people out there. It becomes very unemotional and unreal to me. So I'd have to like look at, okay, who are my neighbors? Who are some people that maybe I've borne false witness to? Who are some people that I've lied about, right? Or lied on, or lied against?
Are we going both sides right now, or just are we focusing on the you shall not give false testimony against you? Like, are we?
Both. It doesn't matter. Whatever. So it's you're looking at the words. I'll stand on that one side right now. The words on that side.
Okay.
On 9.
Okay.
So we've got false witness, neighbor. So neighbor would be, let's just place it as like anybody that would be in association with us, right? That we could possibly be even slightly connected to in some way, or not, right? Okay, so we've got the neighbor piece, and we talked about the witness piece or testified piece. And so one of the words they use is what your Bible uses, testify. Your uses witness, right? We're talking about bearing witness. So start thinking about it this way. So now we've got don't, which is shall not, but just don't. And then we can go into that. If you realize we're only like interesting, you can look at the word shall. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can learn there. But for lack of a better way of talking about it, let's just say don't. Whether it be on purpose or intentionally or unintentionally, right? Like he said, omission or commission? Of false, which is what's false.
Not true.
True. So now we're talking about false and true. True and false. Is there a difference in, is true and false different than good and bad?
You know,
You said, is there a difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the difference?
True and false could be something about a fact. It doesn't relate to whether it's good or bad. That's separate.
Okay.
You know,
Good and bad is like moral.
yeah, that's different.
True and false is factual.
So okay.
Good and bad's a perception.
There you go. So yeah, good and bad is has to do with desires, right? And so you know, we have to be careful when we're looking at some of the stuff when we say, you know, I'm going to say false and true, but you know, the reality is we got to understand what false and true is. True is true and false is false. Right? It's like a math formula. Either it's true or it's false, or a science formula. Right? It's true or false. And so if you think about that a little bit, like, you know, truth lines up one way and yields something, and false lines up another way and yields something differently, right? And when we're looking at a scenario or something like that, it's either true or it's false. Okay? So we're not supposed to bear false testimony, and testimony is something that a witness gives, right? A witness gives testimony, and so a testimony is what? An account of
An event.
a fact, right? But what do you know? And this will be a better question for you. When you're dealing with a witness, and you're needing them to give testimony about something, is it difficult at time, or is part of the struggle in the courtroom to have them give testimony as to what the facts are without their opinion? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so you guys follow me there? Because, you know, when we see something, we perceive fact through our own filters, and also through maybe limited perspective, right? And so we have to, if you don't accept that, and when you really start asking questions, that's why if you're watching a courtroom, they'll ask them very specific questions and they need very specific answers. They don't want you to elaborate, they don't want you to go off. I'm going to ask you something, I need you to answer the question, right? And I need you to answer the question truthfully. And so and attorneys that are really good at this will ask questions sometimes, depending on which side they're on, to get the answer that leads people to believe maybe one thing or the other, right? Because you have to elaborate, maybe to explain if the question's closed, and then the other attorney will come in and ask another question to get them to maybe continue on their statement. But the point being is fact, we're not talking about opinion, we're talking about fact, right? And so what happens what would make, so if testimony, a legitimate true testimony is based on fact, what would you say a false testimony would be primarily based on?
Lie. Untruth.
Untruth?
Absence of facts.
Okay, absence of facts. So if you weighted it, right, and said in every situation there are facts and there are like opinions, right? And whenever we're talking about something, there's fact and opinion, right? In a true testimony, would it be more heavily weighted on fact and lower weighted on opinion?
Yeah.
And then in a false testimony, it would be more heavily weighted on opinion and less weighted on fact. Maybe so to the degree of there's no fact, there's no fact in this at all, or I'm misusing the fact to gear it towards whatever my opinion or feeling is. Make sense? Okay. So it's a way to gauge what's my testimony, right? You know, Jason and I were even talking about this after Alex got done with his testimony about testimonies in general, and about how sometimes we get caught up with and this wasn't about you, it's just in general, anybody. But and I was even talking about myself, how we get caught up explaining things sometimes versus just saying, here's what happened. I was this, I was that, I was this, I was that. And then we have to give our opinion about why I was this, that, or the other, you know, to kind of justify our stance. But that's not really a fact. It's our opinion on a fact that says, I stole a donut, right? And here's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So I'm trying to justify or spin the fact. So when we're talking about giving false testimony, there could be a lot of that in there, right? A lot of opinion, a lot of justification, a lot of venom, and it would be if you're angry, bitter, resentful, right? There's stuff mixed with the facts, right? And some of it can even look good. And when you're talking about giving a true testimony, it's going to be fact driven, right? It's going to be fact driven, because the truth is, that what does Jason call it? Undisputable or undeniable, right? It's undeniable. Now, there are feelings and things that come with that you have, but they might not be the same thing for you on the same truth, right? We can look at the same truth and we have two different perspectives. The truth stays the same. Our feeling towards the truth, our interaction with the truth, how we collide with that truth and how that truth impacts us can be different, right? So, anyway, looking at this, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, right? We're going to put the neighbor point to say it's anybody we're associated or close to or that's in the human race. We want to give an honest account, right? And then we got to think about, what does a witness who's going to testify have to do first of all?
Take an oath,
Pledge an oath. And what are they? So think real simple, right? I get summoned to court, right? What's the first thing I have to do?
Show up.
I have to show up, right? I have to show up. And because if I don't show up, I can't testify. And if you think about when someone shows up, the manner in which they show up and conduct themselves after they've shown up and their appearance, right, comes into play, right? Another thing, what else comes up? You think about. I want you guys to think about courtrooms, and maybe it's courtroom dramas you've seen. What else? What is one of the things that they try to do to a witness if you are the defense attorney and it's not one of your witnesses?
Catch them off guard.
Catch them off guard. But what's the biggest thing you want to do?
Try and get them to contradict themselves.
Okay. Right? Discredit.
Yeah.
You want to discredit the witness, right? So that whatever this person is saying, everyone else says, never mind, I don't buy it. I don't buy it, right? And so when it's saying don't bear false witness, you got to say there's a component of this witnessing, right? That if so our instruction being on the flip side, how do we invert this statement? Take the inverse of the don't bear false witness would be
bear true. I mean,
right.
Bear
True witness about your neighbor to your neighbor, right? So I always go with what are we supposed to do, not what are we supposed to not do, right? So we're supposed to bear true witness. We're supposed to be a good witness. So we know that in doing that, we have to show up a certain way, hold a certain appearance. And again, another thing with witnesses, right? What are some of the ways that they discredit witnesses?
Maybe getting into their background, their past.
Yeah, they're getting into the way they live, right? So if I'm testifying in a financial case, and I'm supposed to be testifying about the management of finances, and I'm an expert in how this is supposed to be done, and blah blah blah, but the other attorney can prove that I'm a total disaster in the management of funds and money, it really doesn't do much for my testimony to the audience that's listening, right? They hear it and they go, yeah, sure you are, dude. I mean, we just saw here that your finances are a total wreck. Now, that's one of the ways that we use to discredit the witness. It might not be allowed, but they might get enough of it out to where everybody says, and all it's got to do is raise a question mark. Not to prove it. It just has to raise a question. And it discredits everything you're saying, right? So to safeguard truth, it's more than just saying this, saying the truth, right? I can say the truth, but if my life doesn't back that up, then I can still be potentially bearing a false witness, because at the end of the day, what I'm saying is not transitioning into truth for people because of the way I behave or the way I conduct myself. Make sense?
Yeah, so like you discredit someone by poisoning the well, then the obligation therefore is to keep your well clean.
Yeah. So you never know when you're going to get called to the stand, right? And we understand that part of our job is in recovery and as believers, and especially as those of us who've been called to teach Torah and bring people in, it's a big deal. right? Because if I'm saying one thing and acting doing this, and everybody can look at it and say, well, I don't care what the guy says. Look at his life.
Yeah.
He's a wreck, you know. Sure, he says God's going to bless you with this, and God's going to do that, and God does this, and God does that. But, you know, he doesn't, his bank account's overdrawn all the time. They just repoed his car. He never comes to work. His wife, and he's cheating on his wife. You know, I mean, it doesn't add up, you know. So you're an illegitimate witness, you know, at that point in time. So you're still bearing false witness in two different ways, right? Because I'm really lying about what I'm an expert in, and my life is a false witness against my friend. Because what did Christ call us? Yeah, friend, right?
Yeah.
So our brother, our friend, or whatever. So we're bearing false witness against our brother and each other, for that matter, and the God in us when we do that. So it becomes imperative in this sense when we're looking at this commandment that our walk and our talk match, right? So taking that and looking at the honor of the Sabbath, how do these two things tie together?
Show up to the Sabbath as you would like a courtroom. Keep it
Okay.
holy by doing so, and match your walk with what you say.
Okay?
Go to the Sabbath, and you know, wherever you're at, keep that with God. Walk out the principles in all your affairs.
Yep. So
Daily life,
why do we
everything.
show up on the Sabbath? Or why are we supposed to at least?
To honor God.
Honor God. Yep.
Yeah.
That's one
Honor
reason.
God.
Yep. That's one reason. Honor God. What's another one? What are we doing by showing up?
We're just obeying His word.
Okay. So I think it says honor the Sabbath and make it holy. Is that what it says? Or make the Sabbath.
Keep it holy.
Some of the words is make too. It's like we're supposed to make the Sabbath. In some of the translations. So how do we make the Sabbath, right? It's like Sabbath's not made for man, but man for the Sabbath, right? So man was not made for the Sabbath, Sabbath man. Sorry, I got it backwards.
You reverence God in that day.
You reverence God in that day, right? I mean, that's one.
Well,
Go think about this. What are we doing over here on the ninth commandment? What are we doing?
Testifying.
Okay, so we're testifying truthfully about our neighbor, right? That's basically what we came like. Through our life and our words matching up, we're giving a true witness, an account of what, if it's from Mark, I think of this way, I'm standing here saying, I'm giving a true statement that this is who Mark is and this is what Mark did. Right? That's what I'm saying. Here's the facts about Mark. Right? So if I take that and then put that and juxtapose that over to this one, what am I saying?
That we're showing up on the day that He rested when He created the earth. Or the planet.
That's part of what the Sabbath is. But what are we doing? Like I said, look at the other side. Lay it all out. I'm testifying. I'm walking us through it. So we've already decided this one means, like an example would be Mark. I have showing up, and I'm testifying honestly about Mark and what Mark has done and who Mark is.
Be doing the same thing to your relationship with God. It wouldn't be the
Yes.
horizontal, it would be
Yeah.
the vertical. So
Exactly.
showing up, testifying that God is what He's done, being grateful, being thankful, being humble.
Yep.
You know,
So we're-
same
we're-
thing, just
Yeah,
vertically.
we are showing up and testifying that this is true, right? If we show up on another day and say it's the Sabbath, whatever it is, then
Bearing false witness.
we're bearing false witness because he's saying it's here, and we're saying it's here, right? So in essence, what we're saying is the underarching principle here, right, is if this is truth and this is truth, and we're showing up to guard your truth, we're showing up to guard your truth and be a witness to your truth. We are safeguarding truth, right? That's the principle there that's within those two, is that we are to safeguard truth, protect truth, show truth, be an example of truth. Sabbath being one of those. It's a big one. But also it's just as big to me to safeguard the truth of you and of our relationship of who you are. So you got to think. And going back to, so now we've got that, right? So we'll swing back over to the one we're on, which is 4, right? Which is the Sabbath. So how do we safeguard truth? Because we can go deal with the other one later on. How do we safeguard truth around the Sabbath day? Why is it such a big deal? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's many camps out there, right? Some camps say it's not a big deal. Some camps say it doesn't matter at all. Some camps say it can be this day. Some camps say it could be another day. Some camps say as long as you take a day off during the week, that's considered a Sabbath because you're resting, right? So what do we go back to that we would look at and say, does it matter? Does it not matter? Are they all right? Are there parts of all of them that are all right? Because all of them can give you great arguments as to their stance, right? They can give you arguments to this day, that day, Friday, Friday day. You know, you talk to a Muslim, they can argue that their Sabbath is the right day. You talk to a Jewish person, they can argue that their day is the right day. You talk to Christians, they'll tell you, some of them, that day is the right day. And you'll have some people, they can explain to you and use scripture and other stuff all about it, that as long as you take a day off, you're okay. And so, I guess the first question is, why is this even important? Is it important? Why is it important? And why is it a big enough deal that it made it into the top 10? Really, top 5, right? Because you got to think. If you think about the other ones that are out there, like, okay, God is God, right? And identifying Him, that's a pretty big deal, right? Like, it's to me, in the grand scheme, if you're going to have faith or not have faith, that's an epic decision, right? Like, there is a God or there isn't a God, right? And then the next one's pretty epic too. Is it going to be one God or is it going to be whatever gods? That's a pretty big decision, right? The next decision is a little bit different, but it has to do with lifestyle and things like that. How am I going to live? How am I going to be an example if I do choose these gods, right? Still a pretty big decision of like, am I going to, do this? And the next one is, it's about a day, right? So on the surface, it kind of, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm looking at these, it kind of looks like out of all the ones that you've got, like, respect your parents, all that kind of stuff, kind of a big deal. Like, you're going to treat your parents like crap and be one of those people that dishonors family and all that kind of stuff. Pretty big deal, right? Are you going to kill people? Are you going to kidnap people? These are all pretty epic type decisions. And then there's this one that's sitting there in the top 5 called, are you going to honor this day and keep it holy? Right? You need to. But to me, it kind of sticks out of all of them, because if I don't, it's not like, it's not like I killed Mark, right? And if I don't, it's not like I was an awful child and disrespected my parents, If I don't, it's not like I kidnapped someone. If we were to go down this list with some faiths and say, hey, do you believe killing people's wrong? Almost all of them would say yes, right? Do you believe kidnapping is wrong? Almost all of them would say yes. Do you believe adultery is wrong? Almost all of them would say yes. Do you believe that not believing in God is a problem? All of the ones that have faith would say yes, right? Do you believe taking God's name in vain? If you do believe in God, we're going to go on that path, is a big deal. Oh, yes. And then we get to this one, and it's like, is the Sabbath a big deal? And then we start having people say it's not. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. It might be a big deal. How come this one is so unique in that sense? You ever ask yourself that question?
Isn't there a scripture where, like, I forget where, it might be off, but isn't there a scripture where Paul basically is like, not that the Sabbath isn't a big deal, but like, more or less that it's not?
There's some scriptures that can be read to read similar that way, that, hey, don't get caught up on that. There's some scriptures that aren't, and you can defend it in a lot of different ways. But it tends to be the one that is disputed, right?
Yeah.
You've got,
And
of course,
didn't the guy come to Jesus and he was like, "Hey, what do I need to do to get into the kingdom?" And he's like, "You know the commandments." And then he recites some of them. He doesn't. I don't think he says like, "And keep the Sabbath." He hits on
a few.
Yeah,
and then you can get into what does he mean by that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it's debatable. No one ever goes, did Jesus say it's okay to kill people? And the Old Testament says it's not okay to kill people. So there's this one that's in dispute. And then again, you think about it. There's people that are very adamant about this one is a very divisive commandment. I always thought that was interesting because the rest of them, people they don't get into debate like, is it okay to kill people but not really kill people? Or is it okay to kill people but not on Sunday or Friday or Wednesday, right? Is it okay to be adulterous as long as you don't hear people debating that, and be like, well, they didn't really mean don't commit adultery, or kidnap people, right? They didn't really mean, just don't steal from that guy. It's okay to steal from this guy, right? I mean, in some faiths, they'll cut your hand off for doing it, still to this day, overseas. Or if you're an adulterer, they'll kill you. So they feel very strongly in some faiths about this to the point of, hey, you will no longer exist. But when it gets to this one, it's interesting that there's so much debate about it.
And part of it might be that a lot of them there's an element of self-interest in wanting to keep those. Like killing people. I don't want other people, I'm not going to kill people. I also don't want other people to kill people. Me included. Like adultery, honor your parents. But this one, Sabbath, is one of the few that's more, I think can be interpreted as one direction. You know what I mean? There's no self-interest undercurrent that like I want other people to keep the Sabbath because how it's going to impact me. In the same way as I want other people not to kill people because if they didn't, I don't want to be killed.
Right.
I don't want my spouse to cheat on me.
I don't want that to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not. I'm never going to agree. It's okay for everybody to start cheating on each other because then that means my wife or I can go cheat, and it impacts me.
Yeah.
So that gets us somewhere. So if every one of the other 9, in changing it or violating it, right? Or the rest of the 10, right? There's 10 there. So we're saying all the rest of the 9, if I violate those, they potentially negatively impact humanity. Including when negatively impacting humanity, it negatively impacts me. Because there is always an element of selfishness. It always has to come back to us for it to be real. I mean, I don't know that there's that many people out there that can say, I'm not really concerned about me and how it affects me. As long as everyone else is okay, I'll be fine. And at the end of the day, there's still a self-serving component to almost everything. But it's an interesting thought. So did God design the 10 commandments where 9 of them impacted in violating or misusing them, where 9 of them would negatively impact humanity, but 1 of them would not? Does that seem logical?
No.
Just on the surface. So could it be that we just don't understand it very well? Right?
I feel like it could still impact humanity negatively by not having a relationship with God. Because then
But most people will tell you they have a relationship with God.
not keeping the Sabbath or looking at it in a way of, don't bear false witness against your neighbor, that kind of mindset.
Yeah.
Like, be truthful. That people lying to each other or against each other could have and does have an impact on everybody.
Self-serving.
So it does have the same impact as any other one.
Well, I think the people sitting at this table, we know that on some level, but I think in discussing it the way that it's perceived on the surface, and many of us maybe before we started studying and looking into this stuff, we would have told you the same thing he just said, which is, well, I don't see how this one negatively impacts, humanity. I'm still observing it, just on a different day, or I'm still taking a day off and resting, or I'm still doing this or that, right? Because we don't really, in looking at it, we haven't at that point in time grasped, how does this work and impact me? What's the point of it? Why? What does it do? And I said on the surface, if you read it, it's like, okay, am I supposed to show up somewhere? And, again, if we go back to what it correlates with, I'm supposed to show up and testify. So we'll walk through it this way, right? If we know it's we're going to say in this line of thought, this isn't all-encompassing, but in this line of thought, we know it's tied to, I need to show up and give a truthful testimony and witness, right? Then what happens to the case if a star witness doesn't show up?
Doesn't move forward.
Huh?
Can't really move forward.
Oh, they can move forward.
Well,
Can't they,
without it
counselor?
being, depending on what's.
Well, some of them can, but others, I think he's saying, like, could fall apart.
Well,
The
the case, this case falls apart. The total case.
Yeah, that's the point, or that's the question here, is like, God doesn't need, like, God's not going to be like, oh man, Eric didn't show up and testify it, he didn't keep the Sabbath, I'm foiled. You know what I mean?
Well, he's not foiled, no.
Exactly.
But again, what's the point? And so I'll the case is diluted because all the facts aren't there, right? And what happens to the person that doesn't show up?
Oh, I mean, they don't benefit.
What happens to if I'm summoned, subpoenaed to court, and I don't show up? What happens?
Contempt.
Yeah,
You're out of order.
I'm out of order. I'm in contempt of court, right? And I can be arrested, right? If I'm arrested, then I'm put in handcuffs and potentially locked up for whatever they decide, depending on what the case is and what's going on, it could be pretty serious. So understand, if we walk it through that way, it does impact. If we walk it through a court case scenario, what happens? Well, and then, so let's walk it through this way. Let's say I'm a star witness. I'm showing up. I'm supposed to testify to Mark's innocence, and I'm the only one that can testify to that. And I don't show up. What happens to me? We just heard, I'm probably going to I'm in contempt of court, I'm going to get fined or arrested or something like that. What happens to Mark?
Goes down the chute.
Right? Potentially.
Both parties suck.
Going to jail.
Now I've hung Mark out to dry, right? And now he could, based on that, he could end up in prison or jail or locked up, right? Because I wasn't there to give testimony as to the facts of the case. So, I'll give you an example of what I'm saying to this, okay? For a long time, people have not shown up for their court hearing to testify. And for a long time, people have asked the question, why are so many people under arrest? You follow me? You think about somebody's arrest, they're in bondage, they're in this. It's because someone hasn't shown up to testify to the truth. Because the truth does what? Right. If I show up to testify the truth at the wrong court hearing, if I'm summoned to show up on Tuesday to testify, and I show up on Wednesday, does that do anybody any good? I still showed up, but I've put everything in jeopardy for the other people and for myself. Right? And I'm not trying to get uber religious here on this stuff, but what I'm saying is there's a lot around being positioned here. Is what I'm trying to bring it back to is when I'm supposed to show up, and then we can tie this all the way back to, do you show up when you're supposed to show up, right? It's a real simple principle, is when you're summoned to show up and testify the truth, or tell the truth, or be the truth, do you show up? Or do you make a selfish decision called, I'll get there when I get there? Right? I mean, that can be applicable at work, in my relationship with my kids, right? There's a principle, right, that's in there that's called, do I show up when I'm supposed to show up in the manner in which I was asked to show up, demonstrating what I was asked to come and demonstrate when I showed up. That's how I'm safeguarding truth. Now, we can get hung up on the Saturday, Sunday, Friday, all that kind of stuff, and those are great debates, and I will, you guys know what point I will take and what argument stance I will go with. And, you know, and if anybody's unclear on that, it's Friday night to Saturday night, you know, is when we're called, when we're instructed to show up. But it's in when we show up, when we're supposed to show up, we demonstrate something that sets people free. That's the thing. When you showed up the other night and did what you were supposed to do, because there's part of you didn't want to, you could have had other stuff to do. You could have changed your story to make it more appealing, more comfortable for you to tell. You could have skipped over facts, embellished different pieces, right? But when I do that, what I'm doing is what? I'm weighting the scale less on facts, more on opinion and whatnot, which is moving it over to the false witness side, right? Because what I'm saying when I do that is, and think about this, this is what I go back to when I talk about telling the truth for the first time. When I decide to not tell the truth, in the simplest form, like Jake asked me a question and I decide to lie, right? What I'm really saying is I don't trust the outcome of what's going to take place if I tell the truth, right? And I'm scared. It's a fear-based decision because I'm looking at it going, I don't see how this could turn out well. So I now need to control or attempt to control the situation by controlling the facts, by skewing them in some way to make either myself or the situation look differently than what it is, because if I lay it out there like it is, potentially bad things can happen to me, right? Same thing if you think about a witness in court. Some of them have to get, a deal, because if I go in and testify to what really happened, I'm literally admitting crime I've done, right? But I'm telling the truth. Most of the time when those guys go in and do that, they're either cut slack or cut a really good deal, because what they've done, they've agreed to tell the truth, which helps to do what? Protect and serve the community and the greater good of the United States or whatever it is, right? So in putting the truth out there, they've taken themselves and put themselves into a better place, but they've also allowed true judgment to take place and a true scenario to be resolved and restoration to be brought, right? Because whenever you can solve a case accurately, what you've done is you brought restoration to a dispute. So when we're talking with people, there's a dispute going on. Think about how we were when we came in. Major dispute, major disconnect. Here and here, here and here, here and here, major dispute. So when someone shows up at the time they're called to show up and they testify the truth without worrying about how it's going to make them look, they allow this connection to take place for other people that can bring restoration. Make sense? All from these little commandments. I think that's cool. I don't know about you guys. Like when I start looking at piecing this stuff together, it always kind of blows my mind. Like, it seemed on the surface, it seems like, hey, don't kill people. Hey, don't do this. Hey, don't do that. And then if we start asking a lot of questions, you can really start digging in and finding some stuff out. And the problem is, again, like we had a tendency to do here, you can get caught up in some religious stuff, which is still fun to argue about. It's a great, great debate. And, like I said, I'll argue and feel like I won, but I know the guys that can argue their case just as strongly, and we'll have to agree to disagree and walk away. But the point being is, what do we take away from it that makes us a better person? What do we take away from this that makes us a higher contributor to this universe and to the people we come in contact with, right? Show up when we're supposed to show up. What do you guys here say, Jason? Just show up, right? Show up and give your testimony. What is the instruction? 1, the one we're looking at over here, which is what for? What's for? Show up. And what's what's the other one?
Truthful.
Give your testimony. Give a truthful testimony. Bam. Safeguard truth. Show up and give a truthful testimony. Now you can argue Jason's case. You're now able to biblically argue that stance. Where somebody were to say, "I don't understand, how is that even biblical? Why is it miraculous?" Well, there's pretty big principles in place here that we're talking about. Thoughts? We're okay on time. Okay, so I want to take this a little bit further, because there's more, and some people might be able to say, "Oh, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true." So let's look at it this way. Remember the Sabbath day, right? Keep it holy. So think of this numerically. What is a Sabbath? It's
7th day.
yeah. So it's one day out of a cycle of 7, right? So there's 7 units, and then one day out of that 7 units, right? So think about where we are right now. So when you have days, and then what do you do when you put days together? It's called a week, right? So take a week, and you have 7 cycles plus 1. What is that called? In the sequence. Think about the yearly sequence. We're at the end of it right now. Yep, counting Omer, right? So you got 7 times 7, right? 49 plus 1. So now we've gone days, weeks, and then counting of the Omer goes into what? Shavuot, right? So you've got a days that goes into a holiday, right? This last week's Torah portions were at the end of Leviticus. We're finishing up Leviticus, if you guys know that. So what happens? So let's take this. So now you've got the 7 weeks into the seasonal stuff. What comes after weeks? Months, right? The monthly lunar cycles, right? So then, if you go into 7, how many of these feast days are there?
7.
7 into 1 year, right? So then you get 7 in 1 unit. Now you go years into, where's another cycle of 7s?
What is it, Jubilee or
You're one ahead.
Shemitah?
7 years equals a Shemitah, so 7 to 1. And then you go 7 Shemitahs into
Or Jubilee?
Jubilee, right? 7 and 1. So the math stays the same. So there's a consistent pattern there that says these things are all tied together somehow. And so the question is, what does Sabbath have in common with Shavuot, have in common with Shemitah, have in common with Jubilee? Let's start at the far end. What happens in the year of Jubilee? Peace. What happens? What's the order? Does anybody remember?
Yeah, you're talking about the no planting and the
There's no planting. But what happens? There's kind of 2 things really.
No sowing, no reaping.
Yep, the same. But there's 2 big things. The 2 big things. Land goes back.
Forgive debts.
Release of debts.
Land is a release of land and release of slaves. Right? Remember?
Yeah.
Release of land, release of slaves. It's a simple way. There's a lot in there, but those 2 things. So then you go to Shemitah. What happens on Shemitah?
Release of debts.
Release of debt owed, right? So there's a release of debt, release of land, release of slave. Got it? So it falls back. We can funnel that back. So you see the concept is releasing, reuniting, right? Because what happens when the land goes free? People get to reunite, and people and slaves go free. They go back to their family. They go back to home. They go back to their place, right? Things go back to where they
Should be.
right? They go back to where they should
See
be.
what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if we wind this back in, that's why it's important to kind of take it all. I mean, we could sit here forever. I'm doing this really quick with you guys. But if you wind this back in to where we are, why are we doing the Omer? Each one of them, there's There's principles that we're supposed to be studying each week that tie into compassion, humility, right? Bonding, all those things that go in each week that we're supposed to be working on. And the goal being, right, for when we get here is to get revelation, right? And the revelation is that what's the purpose of it? To instruct us on how to be, so that when we get back, we know how to operate, right? So it's all about restoration. It's all about getting back to the position called, I've gotten, if you think about why slaves were slaves biblically, it was because they got broke and they had to sell themselves into slavery, right? Because they had made whatever, bad things happen, bad decisions, whatever it may be, and they got released back to go back in, right? So it's about coming back to where you belong and getting a reset, right? So if we flip that and say, and bring this all the way back into why do we show up and why do we show up and why do we bear a truthful witness, an account of what God's done in our life and who we are, and in doing that, how we live, right? What does that do? What is the one thing that happens right at the beginning of at the end of Shavuot and at the beginning of Jubilee? Do you guys remember? The sounding of the shofar, right? Which is the sound of revelation, sound of restoration, right? It takes place, and that's just the sound that comes out of that, right? So the sound that comes out of us at that point, I might be getting too deep here, I'm sorry, but the point being is all this ties back into, right? You got the harvest, you got all this stuff with these things, is it brings everything back into order and brings everything back to where it's supposed to be at the right place, at the right time to make a statement. And when we make that first step to show up and be that instigator of that, then what we're doing is allowing other people to see and experience that at the same time, and then they get to come back. So, in essence, we're releasing ourselves and the captives that are around us at the same time. People that are screwed up, people have issues, right? And those are all fancy biblical ways. But if I say, hey, I'm going to tell my story, I show up, I tell my story, and what happens when I tell my story? People get set free. Something clicks with people. They get woken up. It's like a shofar went off in their head, right? It's like somebody blew a horn at them and said, hey, and their things are rattled up, and they get a moment to where they can come back to where they belong. Some do, some don't. Just like if we read Scripture and look at what happened with people during those times. Some people followed it, let people go. Some people left when they were supposed to. Some people didn't. Right? But that process all hinges upon it. And going back, the Ten Commandments are again, guys, they're they're the overarching principles that everything kind of falls under. But if we look at it, show up and give us a true testimony and don't bear false witness. Why? Because we always want to know why. Why would my lack of doing that negatively impact other people? See, now we're starting to see it, right? Before we didn't see it. Does everybody see it? Because if I don't, I leave people in bondage. I don't bring restoration if I don't. So it does negatively impact all of humanity. But we have to properly understand what that does. Because I'm standing at a certain place, giving a certain statement that lead people back to the same place that I'm standing at. And if I'm standing in the wrong place, I'm leading everyone back to the wrong place with the wrong facts and the wrong story. So it's my job to safeguard truth and position myself in a place where people can find it. And I can only do that if I've followed the process of getting humble, being thankful, honoring my higher power, living a lifestyle that's conducive, which we talked about taking the Lord's name in vain, right? Living a lifestyle that reflects the testimony that I'm showing up to give. Make sense? We got time to talk.
So
I'm not gonna keep going because we're running short on time. So I want you guys to be able to ask questions or talk. Or
it's like a show up so you can match your walk with what you're speaking, so you can accurately give your testimony and, give honor and glory to God, your Creator, by doing all these commands, keeping the Sabbath holy, what we just talked about.
show up. So again, like you can break it down even smaller. Like, what am I supposed to do first thing in the morning? Show up.
Remember your source.
Yeah, remember my source. It's a mini. Every morning is like a mini. We'll call it Sabbath, right? What do you call it? I show up and attest to the truth and testify that before my day starts, right? Principle 1, you're God. There's no other gods but you. I'm not in charge. You're in charge. And then I'm going to make a decision and start visualizing how I'm going to be today and how I'm going to interact with others and how I want others to be by. And in doing that, I'm visualizing not taking your name in vain, right? So that when I show up, everywhere I show up, because I'm only going to show up the place I'm supposed to be at, I'm bearing a truthful testimony as to who you are. I'm a walking, talking Shabbat. And in showing up, this is what's cool, in showing up, the truth that I express and the place that I bring people to is called rest. Because they find peace. I think that's cool. I don't know about you guys.
Fire.
Anybody else got anything?
So, I mean, maybe I've heard it, maybe I haven't. You said something about the shofar when you're blowing it, it's releasing something. What did you? I didn't
So,
really
well,
catch.
there's the blowing of an actual shofar.
Yeah.
Is what people do.
Yeah.
But the picture of it being, and if you've ever heard Rabbi teach on this, he does a phenomenal lesson on it that I won't come close to explaining as well. But you're taking something that's, basically that it's crooked
Yeah.
and it's dead. And they hollow it out and they blow life through it. So and it makes a sound.
Yeah.
And the sound is a notification that something's taking place. Right? When we blow it at the new moon, we're blowing the shofar to announce it's a new cycle.
Yeah.
Right? So at these times when there's a shofar, it's a I guess you call it an idiom or something, or a metaphor of I'm making this sound. I am the shofar. I'm making this sound to announce a new cycle for you, a transition for you.
Okay.
In doing that, right? If you come.
Okay. It's a different way. I didn't really. Maybe I've heard it and I just.
There's a lot of different ways people describe like shofar stuff. Like I said, if you ever get a chance to hear Rabbi Messer's teaching on the shofar, no, it'll blow your mind. Just how he brings it back into who we are and what we do and what that means and all that kind of stuff. It still hits, but it's like you're just like like a lot of his stuff. You're just hold on, put your seatbelt on type
Maybe
stuff.
I need to go to the bookstore and see if I got that. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's a picture of that. Anybody else got anything? So let me do this. Let's take this. I'll ask it this way. What am I asking each one of you? What's your takeaway? What are you walking away with from this tonight with for you and your walk? And what I mean is as always, if we walk away with some great, religious aha moment, that's cool, and it probably feels good, but if it doesn't translate into a lifestyle change, then there's something that didn't connect. You got it? Charles, I think Charles got something.
Yeah, I gotta walk your truth and honor your truth, and that will honor your testimony. That's the whole thing. Does that
Cool.
make sense?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I would explain, and one thing is explore what is my testimony. It's not just hey, I'm telling my story. My story is my testimony. But what? And I'm not asking for answers right now, but something I'd say. What is my testimony? What is a testimony? What is my testimony? What am I being asked to testify to? Because again, different scenarios might have a different question as to what I'm supposed to be testifying to here, right? You know, if I go to court, somebody asks me to testify, they're going to ask me a question to testify to. What is that? You know, I don't go in and tell the whole story every time I'm testifying. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I'm only there for a specific piece, right? I'm here to answer. I'm an expert witness in a certain thing. And for us, and those of us in recovery, our goal is to master our position in a way that we become expert witnesses. So that not only do we get to express and show up, but people call us to show up and testify on behalf because of our expertise in that area. And I always go back to one of my earliest memories when I started reading and studying was like I was having aha moments all the time. Was that and was like almost like a voice, but just God saying to me, everyone would look at that. Write all this down, man. This is not just for you. You've got to go after this because everything I'm teaching you is for someone else. But the only way you're going to be able to teach it to them is to do it yourself first, because they won't buy it from you, and you more importantly, you don't buy it from you unless you're a believer in the product. It's like selling anything else, right? If I'm a believer in the product, I can sell it a lot easier than if it's a product that I don't know anything about. I can still sell you something, but there's a big difference in the manner in which I go about selling you a product when I'm a believer in the product. And I'm only become a believer in the product if I use the product and see results from the product. Our recovery is the same way. You know, I've known many a guy that can regurgitate all the steps, all the principles, all the just for today's, all that kind of stuff. But there's nothing that, I shouldn't say nothing, but when it doesn't click, and there isn't something that manifests itself called into life change, right? Then the validity for them isn't there, and they're not able to sell you, aka testify to what that can do for you, because it didn't do it for them. They're living off somebody else's testimony.
I was basically going to get into is like, testifying the truth or something or the truth of someone else. The only way I could be wrong in this, but the only way I can testify the truth about somebody is if they're honestly, walking it out. If they're not walking it out and I go to testify about that person, it's not truth if they're not actually walking it out and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Makes sense. That's like if somebody's trying to testify in the truth about me, but if I'm not walking it out, if they're testifying about me, how is the truth if I'm not walking it out in the right manner?
Good point, right? If Mark's saying you're a good dude and you're living in a whole nother way when he doesn't know about it, now you've made him a liar.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know that about you because you've lied to him. So now you're a liar and he's a liar.
Yeah, when it's not authentic testimony, whatever, truthful, both parties always suffer.
Well, everything becomes false. It's like if you take a glass of water and you pour some dirt into it, just because you didn't pour the dirt in there and he did, it still becomes dirty water. It doesn't matter. At that point in time, it really doesn't matter who poured it in there. The water's tainted. And so that's what, dysfunction does to function. If you put dysfunction in or you put dysfunction in, it doesn't really matter. The situation's now dysfunctional.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Great point. And there's a lot of accountability around that for us to be consistent in our walk. And that's, another exercise for us to do daily is, was I the same person? If I were to go and poll everyone I came in contact with today, this is a great thought process to go, like if you do at the end of the day kind of inventory, is to think about I saw Jake today, I saw you today, I saw you today, I saw him today, I saw, Susie down the street today. If I were to ask everyone what they thought of me today or how they experienced me today, would they all be consistent? Or would one say, "Woo, that dude's off," this, and the other one's over there like, "Oh, he's such a good spiritual dude." you know, and the other ones are like, this guy's, you know, a little crazy, you know, a little selfish, very angry, quick-tempered, but he's so humble and quiet over here. You know, is there inconsistency? It's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, consistency. The whole show up, testify truthfully. It doesn't matter where you're showing up if you're not the same, regardless.
Yeah.
Show up, be authentic, tell your story, regardless of where you show up.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
We learned that one the hard way,
Yeah.
right? So wherever I go, there I am. So there's an accountability when I think about it to show up a certain way, everywhere I'm at.
Go to a certain place and you're not authentic, you're bearing false witness, you're, you know, taking the Lord's name in vain. These all connect so.
You know, and if I show up, it could be not how I'm conducting, but where I'm showing up. Now I've taken that and put it into a bad environment because I'm bearing false witness just on where I am. Right? Does that make sense? I mean, we can go to extremes. Be like, if I was at a strip club, right? That's a real vivid example. But I'm saying this: I show up there, just being there, I'm bearing false witness on what I say and who I say I am. Doesn't matter why I'm there. Doesn't matter at that point in time, right? Associations become very important because who I associate with and how I associate with them and the places of which I show up and associate with them and with them bear testimony as well. So it makes all that very, very important. It puts, you know, I always go back to it puts a great deal of importance back on my decisions. You know, because my decisions really do determine my direction. My direction determines which way I'm going. Right? So you guys know Shavuot's Saturday, I think it is, right? I think it's Saturday. Saturday night. Saturday night, Sunday.
Can you elaborate on that feast day?
Shavuot?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I've never really.
It is, so it's looked at as, if you read it scripturally, there's not much about the giving of the Torah in there as far as in the instructions. We celebrate the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai because that's when it took place. The instructions have to do around really, I think it's the wheat harvest. Is it wheat or? Yeah, barley's first. Barley and then wheat harvest. And there's some stuff that goes in symbolically of what that is. Again, we're celebrating the plenty that God has given us, right? The giving of the Torah of Mount Sinai obviously being a very epic event where, you know, God himself came down and handed us instruction and met with our representative who came down and testified with us. On the New Testament setting, you have another point in time where God showed up and testified and gave utterance to his word, right? Which was at Pentecost, they call it the New Testament, but it was when the disciples had waited after Jesus had ascended, and Jerusalem's in Acts. That's Acts 2. And they start speaking, and all these different Jews from different areas can understand them and all that kind of stuff. But again, it was an announcing of something, and you think it's in one voice spoken in many languages, hearing one message, which was about bringing it back together. So again, if you look at the scenario, it's kind of weird, but at the end of the day, what was taking place was guys being where they were supposed to be, God showing up and speaking through them to bring release and restoration back to a group of people. That's what took place. It was a very astonishing way of doing it, but at the end of the day, how Sinai was, guy shows up, people show up, they're where they're supposed to be, because not everybody was supposed to be on the mountaintop. Some people are down, some people are up. God shows up, gives revelation, and within that revelation, people are able to move towards and back to they were transitioning at that point out of a slavery set into who they really are and heading towards where they're supposed to be. So with what they needed to do that. So that's what we're celebrating at that point in time. Traditionally, people will stay up all night studying Torah. All night long.
So
I thought about having a sleepover party here and us all staying up all night, but I haven't talked to my wife about that yet, and I'm probably leaving town next week, so I don't know if I can sell her on that. But it's a time to celebrate, God and the Holy Spirit and the restoration. Really, it's about restoration.
So literal context, Old Testament giving of the Torah, New Testament giving of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I'm really trying to dig more in the New Testament because I'm trying to understand what that really was, because there's a tendency for a lot of people to say, well, God finally gave His Holy Spirit at that point in time, like the Holy Spirit wasn't there before.
Yeah.
So to me, there's always a uniqueness in that, saying what really was taking place there. Not that the Holy Spirit didn't come upon them, because the Scripture is very clear that that's what took place. But what did that really mean? What was the status change that was taking place there, and the transition that they were going into? That's kind of what I've been looking at this year, is what was going on, because again, asking the question, they had just been with Jesus after the resurrection. So I was going to go back and ask questions like, well, I mean, what's the deal there? I mean, He couldn't have just done it on the spot, couldn't give them the Holy Spirit, and then at that point in time, hey, they all high-fived because they were up, celebrating, or, they couldn't have said, hey, we were all upstairs and we found something neat in the Torah and there was a new revelation there because it's about revelation. Why did it take place the way it did? It's cool that they say they were in that upper room all together, and then really they were at the temple, because it said it transitions, the story transitions a little bit. But if they were in the upper room, then where all these people come from? They're standing around when Peter starts to. I think it's Peter starts to give his speech. They were in that where they were supposed to be. So I always go back and say, like, why? What was taking place that was unique about this, and what took place there that couldn't have taken place somewhere else? That's another way I have to look at it, is, if it had gone down a different way, what would have been missed in that situation? Well, of course, on that festival, everybody comes in. It's one of the biggies, so they're all there. It's because remember, it's Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot are the 3 feast feasts, right? So everybody has to show up. So everybody's there. Not everybody's always there. Everyone was there because they showed. And not everyone. I shouldn't say everybody's there. The people who showed up were there, right? So they showed up. They were where they were supposed to be. The guys were where they were supposed to be. And then God showed up, like He always does, where He's supposed to. He's always where He's supposed to be. And something happened. And what was that took place? And what change took place because of that? All fun things to look at and ask questions of. And then how does that relate back to me? How do I, when I show up, obviously I want to show up when God tells me to show up in some of these bigger things, but I always have to bring it back to what are the little moments in my life where I'm called to show up, Because if even let's just say I'm a good Jew, Eric's a good Jew boy, and he shows up at Passover, and he shows up at Shavuot, and he shows up at Sukkot, but I never show up anywhere else the rest of the year. What good does that do? So I've shown up 3 out of, I don't know, a gabillion. It's not very many. And if I habitually get in the form of showing up, then when these bigger events take place, it's not such a challenge to show up, right? I show up. That's one of the things I do. I'm not saying me. I struggle with showing up, but that's part of the process, right? How do I show up? How do I keep myself in a position to show up? Well, if 4 is the position of showing up, the only way I get to 4 is 1, 2, and 3. I can't get to 4 without 1, 2, and 3. So in my day, I've got to continuously go back 1, 2, 3, show up. 1, 2, 3, show up. And then when I show up, I can move forward. Because again, I can't. If I'm not there, I can't do anything. And wherever I am, there I go. Anybody got anything? 7 minutes early.
Quick question. Seems like four is the only one out of the 10 with 2 instructions in it as far as remember or honor and keep it.
Mhm.
Is there something to that?
Yep.
Okay.
It'd be fun to look into.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's the only one out of the 10 that has 2 in there, right? As far as
I have to look and see, but more than likely, it is unique. You know, like I said, and again, when we're looking at all these, it's important. Like those things pop up. Like that's a great question. Why does it say? Are the rest of them this? And it's good to compare them because, in some ways, the understanding is this: the 10 Commandments are all kind of alike. Well, they are and they aren't. And it's like, how are they similar? How are they different? Why? What does that mean? You know, does that show me anything? Does it teach me anything in those similarities and in those differences? Because we found out a lot with the similarities, right? With taking the 5 and the 5 and saying, here's how this was similar, it must mean something over here. But the differences can tell you stuff too. It's the same thing as saying, like, you know, if you look at Scripture and say what's said, well, there's a lot that's not said. And there's stuff to learn there when you say, well, you know, if you ask yourself the question, well, why is this said? Because we know the Torah, or the Bible, only tells us exactly what God wants us to know. Right? And every word and letter is there exactly where it's supposed to be for a reason. Then every letter that is not there for a reason. And it's equally as important to try to figure some of that out sometimes too. You know, if you think of some of the stories, like there's a, you know, look at the story of man's life, right, in the Bible. There is, most of them are not a straight biography like, hey, he was born here and they're just going to follow him all the way through. They kind of like, you know, kind of skid around like they're hopping through their life. Why? Why is this story more important than this story? Why is this story more important than this story? Why does this story not have more facts in it? You know, and why does it talk about this and not that? Why is this story we're going through here and all of a sudden there's an interruption in this story that talks about another story? What's that got to do with anything, right? All that's important. End of the day, show up. Do what we're supposed to do, say what we're supposed to do, live how we're supposed to live. Right? I didn't get everybody's takeaways though. Does anybody have anything different than that? I don't want to leave anybody hanging that wanted to say something.
I think I was going to just say that I really like the aspect of when you had said that you're bringing people to rest when you're walking out, the accurate. Like when you're safeguarding the truth and you're an expert witness of God, you're actually bringing people to restitution and rest. So that really made an impact. And for me, it's just, you know, confirmation and just revelation to what, you know, is accurately arranged in my spirit, like personally. So I mean, it's just cool. I loved it.
Cool.
A few things you touched on the end there as far as, because really it's not for us, it's for somebody else. And you can't give it to somebody else until you understand it. You do it on your own. So that, it helps me with the whole, I'm not the guy. I'm not the counselor. God is. And my only job is show up, be authentic, truthful testimony or whatever. And what is given to me, I walk out, I understand it's for me in that moment, but it's really for somebody else. And all I have to do is show up, be authentic, and other people get that rest.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I'm not the counselor, he's the counselor, but I gotta be in line all around for that stuff to happen.
And we never know how what we do or say is going to impact somebody. I mean, I always go back to that, and you know, is that I've been shocked at times at the things that I've done or said that have impacted people. I had no intention of impacting that person, or maybe I had an intention of impacting that person, but not in that way. You know, it's just crazy. You know, and so it is. It's, you know, what we are experiencing goes way past our own little lives, and how we impact others with this truth and with these principles is generational. You know, with our kids or with helping someone. And I always think about this is that Jason and I have talked about this before. Is people that we have tried to, well, example, you guys, let's just say this. I've tried to condense and teach you guys what I've experienced, what I've done in my life when I learned blah, 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 right? Good, bad, and ugly. And that is potentially extending your life, and bettering your life, right? Quality and quantity, which impacts your kids. And that impacts their kids, right? So it is a pretty epic thought to think about, like the little things that we do really do change everything, because if I can I always say, if the work that we can do with you guys puts you in a better, quote, starting point, right, then that means that your ending point is further, which means your kid's starting point is further down the line. You follow me? It's kind of like if my dad financially had made it to a certain point and set me up to a certain thing, and I start here, right? Donald Trump's a perfect example, right? Donald Trump's dad gave him a bunch of money, right? His dad worked, made a bunch of money, and set him up. So his starting point wasn't where his dad's starting point was. His starting point was here. So he was able to get way further than where his father was able to get because he didn't have to spend all this time getting here. That makes sense? And so with us, it's the same thing. My goal is I'll get here, right? If I can get you guys starting point here so that you're not having to do all this, then you can get here. And then the guys you talk to don't have to do all this. They're starting here. And that's how you get somewhere. It takes time, and sometimes we don't even live long enough to see it, but it does make an impact over the course of 20, 30, 100 years, whatever it is. It changes things, All right, it's 9. I gotta go home. I miss my wife. I love you guys, but I miss my wife. And I'm tired. Good job tonight. So I'll give you guys my take, right? We've been doing this for, this is week probably 5, right? We got 4. We spent a week doing an intro, right? We did the first week was the comparing, and then we got into it. So we're like 5 minus a couple weeks me being gone, more like 7, weeks into this, and you guys are starting to figure it out. Like tonight, you started breaking it down before I started having to push to ask the questions. You guys are starting to be able to do this stuff more on your own. I'm just telling you guys, I don't know if you realize it, but you're starting to understand how to break this stuff down better and learning the thought patterns so that you can look at it and really dig into it. So that's cool. That's part of the point, because I want you to be able to do, if I drop dead, God forbid, you can figure this out. Got my new keychain. All right. There you go.
Opened it up.
Good night, guys.
Charles, have a good night, buddy. Thanks for joining.
Good night, guys.
Love you, bro.
Love you guys. All of you guys.
What color?